Hello and welcome. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and as we always state, we strive to bring you the real truth, the whole truth, and nothing but that truth in regards to the biblical scriptures, without the hype or fluff. So please subscribe to us, add a like, or give us a like, then share our unique videos, share our unique channel with your family, friends, neighbours, church friends, be they Christian, Jew or Muslim, so they too will know the real truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth in regard to biblical scriptures. For we are the only YouTube channel, or also church or congregation, that brings you the real truth in regards to Bible scriptures. We have as a business motto in place, honesty is our best policy. We strive to honour that, and also we follow the old time chivalry, where a man's word is his honour and he should make it honourable by keeping to his word, so others will take him at his word. Today we are going to go right back to the very beginning, when it all began, and give you insight into what the original, ancient, or very old scriptures in the original ancient sacred scribal tongue or language actually reads when translated from that old dead language, which was revived and translated into the nearest English equivalent, and staying as faithful to those Old and New Testament scriptures as possible, translated by a native born Aramaic speaking translator from Breetah or Mesopotamia, who has over 15 years experience in doing these translations of the original ancient very old Assyrian Aramaic or Aramaic, Lishana Artika, of the very original ancient or very old Katav Ashrit, sister language of the original ancient or very old Hebrew, also known as Katav Ivri, or Katav Hotep. We will sum this up in this first section of our video. Creation, Genesis. Breetah, or creation, is the real name of the book of Genesis. In Hebrew it's a Bereshit. The word comes to us from the scribal language of the Jewish people. This is the name of the first book of the scriptures, the Bible, in the Hebrew-Aramaic language. This translation is made from the book of Genesis in the ancient Aramaic language, from the oldest manuscripts copied by hand and passed on by the original scribes and monks of the ancient church of the East of the 1st century of Christianity. It clarifies some of the biggest misconceptions. It clarifies some of the biggest misconceptions about the Old Testament regarding creation, Adam and Eve, and the coming of the Messiah. The translator, Victor E. Alexander, in his translation of the Old Testament, also utilises the cuneiform manuscripts discovered by archaeologists in Mesopotamia in the late 19th century AD. The Asherite king Ashurbanipal, during his 7th century B.C. reign out of Nineveh, sent out emissaries or messengers to the southern region, the land of Shinar or Sumer and Chaldee, Babylonia, in search of the ancient epics such as the epic of creation, which included the story of Adam and Eve, the epic of Gilgamesh, which included the story of Noah and the flood, He had them translated in the modern Assyrian language of his day, or the Assyrian language of his day. However, the originals were 3,000 years older, but also in cuneiform. Interestingly, the stories have been preserved essentially the same. Ironically, by the time of Jesus Christ, the scriptures recorded during the Babylonian captivity 5 centuries before had become so narrowly interpreted that the scribes and Pharisees failed to recognize Jesus as the Messiah, prophesied by all those millennial religious records. Today, both Judaism and the Catholic Church have realized the contribution of the cuneiform tablets of the Urhai to the understanding of the roots of the Bible. The archaeologists Sir Henry Austin Layard and Hormuz Rassam, and to a great extent helped by archaeologist, translator, historian George Smith, discovered the Ashurbanipal Library intact in Nineveh and created the 50,000 tablets to the British Museum in London. They are the pride of the British Museum, together with the oldest Ancient Aramaic New Testament, which dates back to the 4th century. And there's a image of the Epic of Creation, 1500 BC, Ashurbanipal Library, British Museum, London. So what Victor Alexander did apparently was he travelled the world, went to the Louvre, Paris, and the British Museum, and looked at all the ancient artifacts, the books, etc., and noticed they had Aramaic underneath it apparently, and then translated all into English, the cuneiform and the Assyrian Aramaic, etc. So that's it, the book of Breetah, or creation, Genesis, in brief. Now we're going to move on to theory of the Aborigine. Theory of the Aborigine. Victor N. Alexander here states he would have liked to have written a seminal book on this theory, but he couldn't take the time from his translation work to do it at that time. However, the usefulness of such a theory in explaining some major misconceptions in the Old Testament compelled him to bring the subject here in abbreviated form. It needs to be fleshed out more if it's purportedly to become a fully fledged theory of biblical anthropology. He hoped visitors to his website, which was downed, we found a way to resurrect it, will find it thought-provoking, worthy of discussion and amplification. Unlike the theory of evolution, the theory of the Aborigine does not see a contradiction between science and the Bible, so it agrees with science. It's one of many, or if not the only one, that agrees with the scientific discovery and theory, but it doesn't agree with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, etc. The Aboriginal factor. So far, the word Aborigines has been almost exclusively applied to the Australian Aborigines, or the Aborigines from Australia. And the translator, Victor N. Alexander, stated to think the word Aborigine is a useful term and should be expanded in its meaning to apply to all people who have retained their Aboriginal qualities, or the indigenous, despite the encroachments of the so-called civilized world. He would have liked to have redefined that term and utilised it in advancing this theory, the theory of the Aborigine, or the Aboriginal factor. A. The biblical perspectives. In the first chapter of Genesis, it's revealed that God created the universe, the earth, the vegetation, and the animals. Then in the 6th eon, God created the human being, Genesis 1:27-28. And God created the human being to resemble his own visage, or his likeness, or his image. He created them male and female. And God blessed them and said to them, multiply and increase, and fill the earth and its environments, and have authority over the fish in the sea, and the birds of the sky, and four-legged animals, and all the creatures that crawl over the earth. There is a book of Q from the Friends of Jesus Society that we've read years ago, and it states there were 4 writers, and they went into the name, or the pseudonymous names, S.P.E. and P, which stood for evangelist, scribe, priest, or preacher, priest, and so forth. And yes, apparently there's supposed to be like 3 or 4 writers. One would take a break, the other one would take it from there, where that one finished off, and then that one would take a break, and the next one would take over from where he finished, or he left off, right? Maybe the first one would talk about Adam and Eve, etc., etc., but the second one, no idea of it. They just carried on from there, right? And then maybe the third one went back, and then started to talk about Adam and Eve or something. It's just kind of weird like that. But yeah. But this seems to say that there might have been a few writers, but they all agreed on the same thing. That there was a pre-Adamic man created in God's image, his likeness, his face, before the actually hominid or human Adam and Eve. Thus God created the human being before he created Adam and Eve. Later it says in Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God molded Adam from the dust to resemble himself. So there's a difference. One was created in the image of God, the other was created from the dust or the earth or the ground to resemble himself, to resemble God. And he blew on their faces the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. So God created 2 human beings, Adam and Eve, and placed them in paradise. Okay, Adam was born of the dust, created of the dust, whereas Eve was created from his rib, supposedly taken out of Adam. That's what she's called, woman, which supposedly in the Hebrew means out of man. Okay, so there's a difference here. Okay, so God created 2 human beings, Adam and Eve, and placed them in the paradise. After the serpent, or Satan, he was talking through that serpent apparently. Some say it was a reptilian, all that sort of stuff. Deceived them, God ejected them from paradise. They had fallen from grace, from his favour, right? Until then they had known no sin, because they were not aware of sin. They didn't even know what being naked was. But after they ate of the tree of knowledge of the good and the evil, they became aware and fell prey to the temptations of Satan. Further in Victor Alexander's interpretation of Genesis 6:4, it's obvious that there were Neanderthals on earth in those ages and even later, because the sons of God entered upon the daughters of men. These are those who were deemed the children of God. They began calling on the original name of God, be it Allah, Eo, Eloi, etc. Okay, so they saw that the daughters of men were cute and beautiful, etc., etc., and they thought, oh, we'll take whoever we want as wives. Okay, and the aliens were born to them. That means not aliens like nanu, little green men. Okay, strange creatures, right? Bizarre looking creatures, because their DNA, etc., is very close. Okay, so when you do that, you have these freaks or disfigured or really strange giants. Okay, who became eternal, fame. Right, they had that fame. They are well known. And stories that you get, there's stories of giants and myths and all that sort of stuff from that surround around that sort of thing. The word alien is appropriate in the sense of strange in the ancient Aramaic language. Besides Adam and Eve, then the evolution of the primates proceeded just as science had discovered, with the various stages in man's development, culminating in the Neanderthal man and then the Homo sapiens. The Homo sapiens were the result of the marriage of the Neanderthal man with the children of Adam and Eve. This is what the translator calls the Aborigine. Yeah, they're hybrids. We're hybrids. Yeah? We're descendants of that hybridization between the Neanderthal man and the humanoid or hominid. First, God created the Aboriginal man and told him to go and multiply. Then in Genesis 4:16, we're told that after Cain killed his brother Abel, he left the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of nomads, or Nod, or wandering, east of Eden. These nomads that Cain intermarried with were the Aborigines that were created before Adam and Eve. In another scripture, the word for them was Nephilim, or the fallen. This is what they were called in the early Jewish tradition. The word in Asherit, or the Ancient Aramaic, connotes Aboriginal man. From the modern scientific perspective, the Aborigines could be called primates, humanoids, or the Neanderthal man. They were essentially animal in nature. However, they had the capacity to think like the Homo sapiens that followed them in the age that God ejected Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, or paradise. So apparently, doing the research on what he's written, we found that these Neanderthals were created. They had a soul, etc., but they had no, let's say, Ruach HaKodesh or Holy Spirit, right, which connected them to God, so they served that one true God. And they followed their animal instincts. Okay? They had pretty much intelligence of their counterparts, the hominoids, to an extent, but they basically followed their animal instincts. Yeah. So until they are introduced to God and Jesus Christ, they'll be animalistic. Okay, that's the only way they'll be saved. Yeah. They receive that spirit and they change, etc. What ultimately survives of the original Adam and the Aboriginal nature of the Neanderthal man is the hybrid human being. Thus, after the flood, Noah's progeny, or his descendants, or those to follow, were a mixture of the human being and the Aboriginal, or the Neanderthal man. Thus, all people have the Aboriginal nature alongside the human nature. The proportion varies, and one of the two becomes dominant, such that, in the translator's view, the anticipation of the Messiah during the Old Covenant days, or the acceptance of Jesus as Lord and God in the Christian era, is what transforms the Aboriginal or Neanderthal man, or that hybrid, into a wholesome human being. This is the basis of this theory. The theory of the Aborigine is advanced in the hope of understanding and possibly ameliorating man's savage nature that seems to defy the forces of civilization. Century after century, mankind seems to be headed down the dark tunnel of self-destruction. Can the understanding of the scriptures shed some light on mankind and prevent his total annihilation? B. The scientific perspective. Anthropologists have discovered the bones of many generations of ape men that roamed the world as nomads thousands of years before the emergence of the Homo sapiens. In recent studies, at that point, it had been theorized that the Homo sapiens must have replaced the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals were, according to some anthropologists, less aggressive and had an easy prey for the cleverer Homo sapiens because they were bigger, bulkier, stronger, but slower. Right. Interestingly, the Neanderthals were taller in stature and stronger. They had a different shaped skull, which made it hard for them to run, apparently. And this lack of ability to run quickly is said to be the reason why they didn't fare well against their predators, both animal and human. However, it may be that the Homo sapiens had another different feature of the brain that helped them. The neocortex of the human brain is very narrowly connected to the old brain, or the animal brain. This constriction made it possible for the new brain to dominate the old brain and think freely from it, and on a much more sophisticated level than the purely instinctual. It's possible also that the Neanderthals then had a less differentiated neocortex. A good percentage of anthropologists now believe that the two groups intermarried and produced modern man. Or another way to put it, it would be to say that the Homo sapiens absorbed the Neanderthal man, that they were able to reproduce would imply that they were one species to begin with. Okay, so eventually, with their interbreeding, they wiped out the actual Neanderthals with these hybrids. As a political perspective, modern biblical scholars, following the European tradition of the Middle Ages, have ignored scientifically gathered evidence and have tended to treat the Bible as a spiritual book without scientific merit. Most churches treat the Old Testament as a history of Judaism and early Christianity. The only exception to that is some Western evangelists who preach that the Old Testament prophecy is not yet all fulfilled. They cite from the book of Daniel, for example, about the emergence of world empires and the coming battle of Armageddon, which is also mentioned in Revelation. They ignore the fact that this battle had already taken place. It was called World War II. Then they allude to certain historical references in the Bible to some events that will unfold along modern political thinking. However, since the Western Bibles are poorly translated from a scientific perspective, they have made a mess of interpreting these events that have already taken place, as well as distorting most of the historical events in the Bible. One of the examples that we're dealing with today is the basis for the rights of the Jews and Palestinians according to the Book of Genesis. The translation and the interpretations are unfortunately totally wrong. The Book of Genesis has nothing to do with these modern issues. The Old Testament has to do with the prophecy about the coming of Jesus Christ, and all the prophecies of the Old Testament have already been fulfilled. The issue of the Jews and Palestinians today has to be resolved on the basis of what is relevant today. Of course, it's a Christian thing to do, to promote peace between Jews and Muslims, especially as Christians are also involved in the region. Christians should really promote peace at all times. Rabbi David Weiss and his people, that's what they were doing to the people in Israel, the Jews in Israel. Stop persecuting them, stop doing what you're doing to them, harming them, etc., because they've lived, and the people before them, the rabbis before them, live with them in peace, maybe under Islamic law, but they live with them in peace, they got along. Most of the problems in the world are due to man's aboriginal nature. Wars may be caused by evil men, but it's the Aborigines who fight them. Throughout history, evil men have created conditions for the kind of war that the Aboriginal element cannot resist. Attacks against the homeland must be defended if a nation is to survive. Satan is behind all wars that aim to destroy faithful believers in the Lord. There are no holy wars. Satan works through evil leaders that commit atrocities against innocent people or call for genocides against helpless nations. The Aborigines can be made to commit any atrocities as long as it's perceived as a national cause. In immoral, or secular societies, the Aboriginal element is controlled by the leaders. If the leader is a moral person, wars can be prevented, atrocities and genocides can be avoided, but they usually take those guys out. Listen to John F. Kennedy. His speeches were brilliant. If all Americans are considered American, most of them are immigrants, etc., and to be treated as such according to the Constitution, etc., etc., then that's how it should be, right? There shouldn't be any differences. And suddenly this guy gets killed off for whatever other reasons as well, political reasons as well, because some felt that he may have been trying to give too much leeway to American Negroes, etc., and so forth. But today they've had it hard because they go to get a loan, they can't get one, yet everybody else can. Why? Because they can leave the country, whereas these poor American Negroes can't. They can't return to Africa. Well, they can, but they'll have to all go en masse. They've got nowhere to go, and there's a lot of bias, racism, etc., towards them. And there's more here on the Aboriginal element. It goes into the cultural perspective. The worldview perspective, or Weltanschauung. The US has historically avoided becoming an empire, but in the absence of an opposing superpower, the Aboriginal element could be flirting with that idea. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the balance of power theory has been set aside. Suddenly becoming the only superpower in the world is a difficult situation to handle. There are international expectations at play, and so forth. And then he covers the historical perspective. What does he say here? By staying out of world conflicts until there's a clear underdog to save from being annihilated, the US has managed to play a heroic role during World War One to World War Two in Korea. Apparently they only get involved in matters in other countries if there's a potential outcome for them, right? I.e., they can seize the oil, control its distribution, make money from it, obviously, etc., etc.